Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Today I thought I would do something with some fossils. I picked out a couple of small Ammonite fossils that I have. They've been cut in half, I'm not sure what you call that axis, so that you have two equal halves. And they're pretty cool looking, so I think they'll make for some nice little earrings. I love fossils and I think they're interesting. And so I think this should be a fun project, probably in the beginning to intermediate range. It's not going to be too challenging. I've added a couple of faceted citrines, about 6 millimeters, one for each, that'll dangle below, and I think that'll look pretty nice. So we'll give it a try and see how it turns out. All right, let's get started. So these are a few of my different types of design idea sketchbooks that you can get on my merch store. Most of them have some useful information on the back. This particular one has a gauge to inches to millimeters chart. This one has fractions of an inch to decimals to millimeters. I found both of those ones really useful. The one I'm currently using right now has some different information about melting temperatures and flow temperatures of different kinds of solder, and I think that's a useful thing to know about. So get yourself one or two of those. I think they're pretty handy. The real feature I like the most about them, though, is this little dot matrix that's in the background, because since I started the channel I've been doing keeping a record of all of the different projects that I do so I don't repeat myself, and also so I know how to go back and find out how to do something if somebody wants me to make a similar one. So I'm not terribly good at drawing, so it's good to have something with some of this little grid pattern in the background for me. So I thought we could do some Ammonite earrings, and with earrings, sometimes I'll do one off camera because I want to see how it turns out, and this is what I came up with. I picked out some little tiny Ammonite fossils. If you're unfamiliar with Ammonites, they were an extinct cephalopod, like octopus or a squid, except they had a spiral shell, and so they had little tentacles coming out. And from what I understand, they first showed up in the fossil record about 419 million years ago, and they died during the extinction event that killed the dinosaurs too. The KT boundary is where they stop showing up in the fossil record, as far as I understand. They are cool little fossils. They're nice spirals and they're fun, and they come in all different shapes and sizes. These ones are pretty standard ones. I got these at a gem show, and they're probably, my guess is they're from Morocco. There's a lot of fossils that come out of Morocco. And these ones that I have here, I think it's the black part, I think is pyrite, honestly. And the inner parts is probably calcite. But they must have been found in sand because there's still a little bit of sand left on where they've sandblasted it away or whatever. They used a little Dremel or something to chip it away. But because these ones are thin and fragile, I'm going to set them with a back on them like that, versus the faceted stone, which I created a little step bezel for. So we'll make one of each of those, and then we'll hook them together and add some rings and put some ear wires on them and call it good. I think they're interesting fossils, so you can have a little bit of geologic history on your ears. All right, well, let's start by making some bezels for these guys. The materials I'm going to use, I'm actually going to use two different thicknesses of bezel. Because these are so fragile, I don't want to have to bear down too hard to get it to lay over the top edge of this. And so I'm using the thinnest bezel that I have, which is 28 gauge, and I think that's 0.33 or 0.32 millimeters, something like that. For these stones, I'm going to use 0.41, which is 26 gauge. It's a little bit thicker. The other materials I'm going to use, this is 20 gauge for the ear wire, 18 gauge for all of the little wires where they hook together, and then and also for the step that I created inside of there. That's 2 layers of 18 gauge round wire, and finally some 26 gauge sheet for the back. So that's what I used for this here. So, all right, well, let's get started. This is the 28 gauge. So let's file the end flat to start with. If you're unfamiliar with my channel, here's some information about the various aspects of my torch and solder and flux that I use. I've done a couple of different Ammonite pieces for the channel. Here's one. Check that out. I thought that was a fun one because I tried to recreate the actual Ammonite tentacles and everything, at least sort of stylistically. I thought that was a fun one to do, though. Apparently I like making things with tentacles. Okay, so I generally try not to put where the bezel solders together right on a corner like that. So we're going to put it somewhere in the middle of this flattish spot. When we do set them, we'll use a little bit of tag board in a few strategic spots to elevate portions of it so it has a nice flat way of sitting in the bezel. And I'll probably file these down just a skosh. They don't need to be this tall. Not for these little ones. Okay, so let's get that up there. Usually make a mark just a little bit beyond where they meet so I have a little room for filing. I don't want to have a lot of excess space on this. I also don't want to have to force it in there because these ones are a little bit fragile. Alright, so let's make sure the ends are flat and we'll go ahead and solder those together. If you need to, this is a good time to use a miter vise jig if you have one of those. Get a nice straight edge on things. When I do bezels, I usually make them into kind of a rectangle or a square, just to make soldering real easy. You may notice that I dimpled the bottom here a little bit. When you have a little bit bigger bezels and they're kind of floppy, that makes them a little springier, so it's easier to get them pushing together nicely, which is a desirable thing. We'll just cut a little bit of solder. If I can refrain from knocking that over. If you didn't see my last video, I just made, it's actually the second compartment ring I've ever made for the channel. It's more of it's a turquoise poison ring, a lot of people call them. It's got a hidden compartment underneath the stone. It's a fun one. Oops. The original one I did was not this last one, but the other one that I've done was really unique, I thought. And my wife snagged it. Both of those can be viewed in my, if you look in my ring playlist. That looks pretty good. So let's find some 26 gauge sheet, which is 0.41 millimeters. So I usually put anything that has a bezel set faceted stone into the intermediate category. Although the more I think about it, the more I think it might be kind of at the upper end of beginner. It's not really that hard to make a step bezel. But a lot of times people haven't had much experience doing it. So honestly, if you made this with just the ammonites, that's pretty basic. Or if you did a non-faceted stone, Or if you've already mastered the whole faceted stone thing and you're still kind of a beginner, that's fine. So if you're new to this, that's flux that I just put on. You want to dry it so that it creates a nice crusty coating that prevents the metal from oxidizing more and makes it better for the solder to want to stick both the bezel and the sheet below it. So I'm going to put a few pieces in here and push them up against the edge. The thing about making bezels is it's easy to get that bezel sitting on top up to the soldering temperature. The piece underneath it is kind of protected by the bezel itself. So you want to use some strategic movement of the torch flame so as to get them both to reach the 1450 degrees that hard silver solder requires in order to flow and stick. You want them both to reach that temperature at roughly the same time. Like I said, the bezel at the top here is really exposed to the flame, so there's a lot of surface area in there, so you've got to kind of keep it moving around all the time. You can use one of those tripods if you like that kind of setup. That way you can get underneath the piece and heat from below. You can also tip it upwards, or you can just use some really kind of strategic moving this around. The trick is to kind of avoid the bezel itself where you don't want to spend a lot of time focusing right on the bezel. It's pretty easy to melt those, especially when you're new. Although I shouldn't say that because I'll probably melt my bezel that way. It wouldn't be the first time. Try and get a good seam all the way around. Okay, my next step is I'm going to go ahead and cut off the excess sheet here, and then we can start working on a bezel for the faceted stone. You can use your saw to do this if you prefer doing it that way. Sometimes I make pieces of jewelry with those orthoceros fossils, which are kind of straight looking rib shells. I also have this really kind of cool, a couple of these. You've maybe seen these before, but these are parts of Ammonite shells too. It's the sutures where the different segments of the shell come together, cut from a different angle. And they have these really almost called fractal looking kind of patterns to them. I really like them, they're interesting. I live near the Pierre Shale Formation, I think it is. And there are both, well, there's a straight-shelled kind of creature called baculites in the formation. And sometimes you can see the sutures on those as well. There are some ammonites around, but I haven't found any very well fossilized ones around here. Alright, so that'll be for this one now. So we'll set that to the side for the moment. Now let's grab the other citrine. And the reason we do an open back on these ones is because faceted stones have a pavilion, which is pointy. That's the bottom part of the stone if you're new to this. The top part's called a crown, bottom part's called a pavilion. And the other thing about having an open back with a little step in it for these kind of things is it gets more light, so it's more sparkly. But definitely not ideal to set it closed back. So we're going to do a step bezel. I had a request from one of my patrons to do a particular type of toe ring this week. So that's, I usually do a Patreon exclusive video for them each week. A lot of times I have them vote from 3 different potential projects. This time I had a specific request from one of them to do a particular type of toe ring, and so that was the this week's video over there. With faceted stones like this, when you're making a bezel, if you push too hard, sometimes they'll pop upwards like this, and then you'll get an inaccurate measurement. But we definitely don't want to have a lot of extra space since we're going to be sitting on a little ledge that's right inside of the bezel. So, with bezels, usually you want to push them past a little bit and then pull them back so they're pushing together nicely. If you don't, if they're just barely touching, when you heat them, they kind of relax under the heat and pull apart, and then you get a crack on either side usually. So it's a good idea to have them pushing together pretty well. You can do this like I do it if you want, or you can put it on a bail making pliers, maybe that works, or your round nose pliers, or if you have a jump ring mandrel. I didn't ever used to have a jump ring mandrel, or a bezel mandrel, or whatever you want to call it, until I got one when I bought somebody's tools one time, because they had one. It is kind of handy once in a while to have. It's not one of those things you have to have, but they are occasionally handy. It's like a bracelet mandrel. You know, you don't really need one. You can shape it on something round that you have laying around the house. A can of Lysol. Alright, so let's use that bezel mandrel. That's reasonably close, I think. I get asked a lot of times about this little bump of solder on the outside of the bezel. For the most part, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to file that off, because a lot of times, if you're putting a bottom on a bezel, some of that's going to flow down into that bottom seam in addition to the solder that you have up against it. So a lot of that will dissipate. Or on this one, even since we're setting it on some little rings that are going to be on the inside, I bet some of that will spread out or flow downwards. And any excess, when we're cleaning up at the end, we can kind of clean it off with a rotary tool or whatever. So it's not one of those things you generally have to worry too much about. Okay, so this is some 18 gauge round wire. I'm just going to make a couple of jump rings and set one on top of the other once I have them about the right size to create a little step in there. You can use a lot of different things to make a little step. You could use two bezels offset from each other if you wanted to. Although when you try and solder them together, they do have a tendency to kind of like skate around and not stay in the same place, so it's kind of hard to position those. But I sometimes use flattened square wire. That's kind of become like a strip of narrow thing, and that makes for a nice step bezel. And it's also taller than this, so you can, if you want just one layer to make it stand up higher and not have to do two different things, that works okay. I suppose you could cut some sheet in a strip. That's pretty good. So let's cut one more. That one's pretty snug, so we'll use that for the bottom one. I think it's tighter than this other one. So let's put this one on top of it. And push it down. Do make sure they're pretty flat. You don't want to have any kind of wobbly surface in there for your stone to sit on. The best way I've ever found to solder these on is just to set them on top of some pieces of silver, or some pieces of solder. So like make like this. Let's throw an extra one in there just to be safe. We'll flux it and then set it right on top of that, and then just heat it from the outside like we normally do for a regular bezel. One thing that does happen sometimes, if you linger too long on this, The sterling wire on the inside melts at a slightly lower temperature than the fine silver wire that makes up the bezel. And so it's possible to melt that wire on the inside before you melt the bezel. And if you start melting that wire, it usually doesn't melt very symmetrically, and so you may have to start over again if you melt it to the inside. So you just want to solder to hold it in place. And you don't want to linger there too long. Yeah, that looks pretty good. But our next step is we need to connect these things together like this, and then make some ear wires to put on here. So this ring here and this ring here are the same, and the way I made those, I used the smallest little cylinder on my bail making pliers. Make a little spring out of it, part of it. And then I need two of these, one for the top of the earring and one for the top of the other bezel. So let's cut two of these. I have cutters that cut flush on one side or relatively flush, but not on the other side, so that's why I was flipping them over each time I cut to get rid of the beveled cut that was left over from the previous one. You can also saw them or use one of those, bezel or jump ring makers or whatever floats your boat. I'll take these two and solder them closed first. That way some solder will already be in place where I want it to attach to the bezels. I do something called pick soldering. It's where I pick up a little bit of the solder by melting it on the end of this titanium pick, and then once the piece is up to the flow temperature of the solder, I touch it where I want it to go and it jumps right on there. Super useful skill. If you're interested, I'll put a link up there on how to do it. It's one of those things that kind of made everything a lot easier for me once I figured out that trick. It allows you to place solder really precisely in exactly the amount you want to. See, I picked up a little ball of solder there. The trick really is don't stick it in there until it's about the time for it to flow. See, I jumped the gun on that one a little bit. Oops. Okay. We also, if you notice, on this one that I made earlier, I have kind of a half of a circle, but it's a little bit bigger than this one. So what I did for that one, what's the rest of that 18 gauge? So I used the next one up, which was, instead of this one, I used this one. I think I still had part of the spring left. I guess I could have just used that. But I needed to show you how I did it anyway. So this one, I just cut a half a circle. Oops. You could measure precisely if you wanted to. I'm just kind of estimating. I have precise days and I have estimated days. Today I think is an estimated day. So I can get this a little flatter. It would behoove me probably to move those other rings elsewhere so I don't accidentally melt them while I'm not paying attention. But let's live dangerously today. And even though there's already some solder there, I want to make sure I have a really good solder connection here. So I probably will pick a little bit more in there, just for giggles. Presupposing I can actually pick up a little piece of solder tonight. Okay, so we got that one. Now we need to put a little one on the side of this. So I'm going to put that one, just hold it with my tweezers. Get this all fluxed up. There's already solder there, so I can just plunk it right on there once it hits soldering temperature. So we got that solder joint on the ring downwards. So if you struggle with doing things with both hands and keeping focus on both of those things, it is good to know that after you practice for a while, some of those things become automatic. And so doing something like plopping a little ring onto something without melting your bezel or whatever, that all becomes much easier as you practice. So don't get too discouraged. Yeah. All right, so I'm just going to take my saw, supposing I can find it. I'm just going to cut a little notch through it. I'm just going to set this up so that's not hanging on that. So that's not really touching. And then I have some easy solder, easy paste solder. We'll just use that to close this up right here. Just enough to get that to solder closed. And then we can pickle this, and then I'll add some ear wires to it, and we'll set the stones after it's been pickled for a while and polished. Okay, so a lot of times if I need a little backing, I use this tag board, which is kind of like the stuff that's on the back of legal pads. This stuff was used to pack some paper products or something like that to stiffen it up, but it's really nice thick stuff, so I used it for this. I put one layer that cut to line the bottom of it to give it some cushion, and this has a thin spot from about right here to about right there. So I'm going to put a little piece up against the side here like this. So normally I would kind of use the flat side of my chain nose pliers here as a bezel pusher, and I'll do that a little bit, but I'm going to be real gentle because this stuff is not as durable as some things. The edge on here is a little bit bumpy, so you're going to have some little bumps in it out here. You don't have to do it with your pliers if you use a burnishing tool or a bezel rocker or whatever you use. Whatever works best for you is fine. Just remember that these may not be as hard as like an agate, so it's pretty easy to break them. So I'll get that cleaned up a little bit better with the Dremel as well. And let's make this into an ear wire. This is that 20 gauge wire I put on here before I polished. I usually grab it right by the top of the knot there, pull it forward, and I usually use pencil, a round pencil. Couldn't find a round pencil tonight, so I grabbed a round pin. Just going to do that to it. Probably did the first one here, so let's line them up so that we get the length of the ear wire about the same. Then we'll just cut them off. Right there. Bend the end out. Make sure that end is smoothed out nice with the file. Like I said, we'll get these all cleaned up. So, yeah, I like the way those came out. I think those will be really pretty once I get those all cleaned up nice. So I'll get some better pictures and put them at the end. Tell me what you do differently. One thing that's always hard for me on these ones is setting those little stones on these separate bezels that are flopping around. I'm curious how people secure those when they do it themselves. So if you have an idea on that, I'd love to hear what you do. All right, well, that was the Ammonite and Citrine earrings. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you go. That really helps to get my channel promoted, and I really appreciate that. Feel free to share it with others too who you think might find it interesting. I'd also love it if you'd visit my main channel page. I have 600 plus videos now. I've been doing this for 4 years now at 3 videos per week, so there's quite a pile of stuff over there. I'm almost positive you'll find something useful and or interesting that'll help you with your metalsmithing, so check it out. And make sure to subscribe to my channel. There's no cost to it, and I think you'll find that it's a valuable experience to be subscribed to my channel. You can ring the bell and get notifications of when I release new videos, and that is generally on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. So I'd love to have you sign up. I wanted to thank some people before I go too. My patrons over on Patron are my core group of supporters. Not only do they provide me with financial help, they've created a really nice environment over there with a lot of cool people who know a lot of stuff about jewelry. So we can all kind of tap into each other's knowledge base, and we can all help each other to get better at this. So it's a nice environment, and I really like interacting with that group over there. So thank you for making it that way. I really appreciate it. The other group are my YouTube subscribers, and we just passed 27,100, I believe. We're probably getting close to 27,200 now. That's an amazing number, and I really do appreciate that. Thanks for signing up. Thank you for the wonderful comments. I get so many nice comments from people, and I've met a whole bunch of really nice people through YouTube, so thanks for all of those kind comments. I do really also appreciate all of the suggestions, the constructive criticism, the financial buys, the buy me a coffees, the super thanks, the merch purchases, and buying my ebooks. All of that stuff makes my channel sustainable, and I couldn't do it without your help, so thank you for that. Finally, visit the video description down below for some important links. There's a link to Patreon if you want to check out the various tiers of membership over there and find out what's that platform's like. There's a link to my merch store if you'd like to get yourself one of those nice design idea sketchbooks I talked about. There's some other merch over there too, including magnets and t-shirts and mugs, and a few other things with metalsmithing information on it. So get yourself something fun. You deserve it. Finally, there's a link to my newest ebook, which is the guide to 2025's tutorials. It includes a page for each of the videos I did during 2025 and a link to the video, a picture of the sketch that I drew, a picture of the final outcome, a list of materials you need, stone information if there's a stone in the project, a difficulty rating, and some notes I took about the project, including difficulties I ran into, things I might do differently, whether I like the outcome or not, and why. So all sorts of useful information. It's a great way to have tons of projects right at your fingertips, and a nice way to support my channel. If you want, you can even get 2 or 3 at a time. I've done 3 years, 2023, 2024, and 2025. You get a discount if you buy more than one, so check it out. I think it's a great value. All right, well, thanks for watching today. Take care. Happy silversmithing.